Perfect. Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Alex Tan, and I have Vicky Ho here with me. And this workshop is on taking care of your mental health. And so just wanted to spend a couple minutes to introduce ourselves. We are both mental health professionals. I myself am a psychologist. I work at Children's Hospital of Orange County, or CHOC Hospital. If you're from my area, maybe you either have been there or you recognize our mascot, the Choco Bear. I work a lot with children, teenagers, and young adults related to brain functioning and mental health. And of course, something that's been difficult for everyone during this pandemic is this matter of mental health. And so we just wanted to support everyone in doing this. I spend a lot of time with young people and with people your age. I even spent a year working in a juvenile detention center, that's juvie jail. So I've worked with people going through really difficult situations as well. So believe me when I say I know a lot about what's on your heart and what's on your mind. And I hope this session will be helpful for everyone in taking care of their mental health. Vicki?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session. It's great to have both any parents and serving ones joining us, and you young people. Actually, we're really excited here to kind of demystify what goes on in therapy, because therapy is actually confidential, meaning nothing is disclosed outside of therapy unless there's issues of safety, self-harm or harm to others going on. So it's kind of a mystery what goes on in therapy. So we're kind of excited here to share this. And so my background is I don't have Alex's credentials, but I do have two teenage kids, 17 and 15, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. That's what the LMFT stands for. I went back to school a little bit later out of a burden for the saints, just to help the saints know more about caring for our mental health, and that it's important to do so, to be aware of what resources are there, to be able to access those resources. So I'm really happy to be here with you guys today.
All right. Okay, so if you're a young person, if you grew up in the church life, you probably recognize this image, right? We all know that we have three parts. We have a body, we have a soul, and we have a spirit. And our soul consists of our mind, our emotion, and our will. Mind, emotion, and our will. And so when someone asks me, what is mental health? Usually I tell them that it's really just the well-being of our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. And that exactly lines up with the three parts of our soul, our mind, emotion, and will. And so really taking care of our mental health is really a matter of taking care of our soul. And this is important to the Lord. I have here 1 Thessalonians 5:23, and the God of peace himself sanctify you wholly, and may your spirit and soul and body be preserved complete without blame at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Right? So the Lord really cares about our whole being, and even our soul, that our soul would be preserved complete. And so as we know that the Lord is trying to spread from our spirit into our soul. So it's important that we take care of our soul so that it's in the best condition for the Lord. Okay. And so something that we talk about in therapy a lot is this triangle that you see here on the right. Okay. And this triangle shows us that there's actually a very strong relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. Okay, so all the parts of our soul actually interact with each other and affect each other quite significantly. And I'll give you a great example of this. You know, if you are thinking about the fact that nothing's going to work out, and I think a lot of teenagers have had this thought recently during the pandemic, you know, that I work with, that nothing's going to work out, you know, and so that's a kind of thought that comes into your mind. And so if that's what you're thinking about, then of course, how are you going to feel, right? Of course, you're going to start feeling sad. You might start feeling depressed. You might start feeling anxious. And then what happens when we're feeling that way, it starts to affect our behavior, right? We start maybe not trying or putting as much effort into things. We maybe avoid people or the responsibilities that we have. And what happens is that once we start doing that, it starts to reinforce the same thoughts because things aren't working out. And so then we start to have those thoughts more often, more strongly. And there's a cycle that happens, right? Our thoughts then affect our feelings then affect our behavior, so on and so forth. And dear young people, those that let this cycle go on for too long, oftentimes that's when we start being concerned about mental health disorders like depression or anxiety, because it's become so hard to not think that way and not feel that way and not act that way, right? So one of the goals of today is, as Vicki said, you know, in therapy, we work a lot with young people and with young adults and trying to break this cycle. And so we want to kind of show you a few different kinds of coping skills that we use in therapy with our clients. And we wanted to focus today on giving you a coping skill for your mind, a coping skill for your emotion, and a coping skill for your will. Okay, that way we can take care of all the parts of our soul. So before I jump into the first coping skill, I just want to ask Vicki a quick question. Vicki, what do we even mean by coping skill? What is that? What is that?
Great. That's a great question. And that refers to, sorry for the feedback here, it refers to how we manage distressing thoughts, distressing feelings, even distressing behaviors that sometimes we don't really understand where they're coming from. And so coping refers to, okay, there can be healthy coping and there can be unhealthy coping. And unhealthy coping would be just kind of continuing in this pattern of negative thoughts, negative feelings, negative behaviors, and not being able to break that, and even potentially doing some destructive things, either that could be, you know, acting out or even self-harm, suicidal, you know, tendencies. So those are all unhealthy coping. And today we want to talk about not just not doing something, but what to do, what can help you out in these three areas of your being to cope in a healthy way and manage. So that really refers to the fact that we all can struggle from negative feelings and negative thoughts, and it's more about managing them. So those negative feelings and thoughts don't mean you're defective or something's wrong with you and you know, you're incurable. It's just about learning something, learning some coping skills. So these are things you can learn and practice. So maybe it's not what you normally do, but these are all skills that you can learn and start to practice in your daily life.
Awesome. Thanks, Vicki. Okay, so we're going to talk about our first one today in the area of the mind. Okay, and actually the Bible tells us that the mind is the leading part of our soul. And you know, that's what psychology tells us too. The reason why thoughts are at the top of that triangle is because it really starts with the thoughts that affects everything else. Okay, and the word tells us in 2 Corinthians 10:5, as we overthrow reasonings and every high thing rising up against the knowledge of God, and take captive every thought unto the obedience of Christ. Okay, the word tells us that our thoughts, we really need to take care of. We need to challenge We need to stand against the unhealthy reasonings, the negative thoughts, things that even go against the knowledge of God and against our obedience of Christ. So, you know, oftentimes, as Vicki mentioned, we have negative thoughts, and it might be easy for us to think, man, what's wrong with me, right? How could I possibly be thinking this way? Why would I even think that? You know something, dear young people? Thoughts are just that. They're just things that show up in our mind, whether we're the source or not, and they appear. And if we realize that just because we have a thought doesn't mean that it's true, or doesn't mean that it's scary, if we can kind of separate ourselves from that, we realize that actually what's going on in our mind, we can stand up against, right? We can challenge, and we can do so with a very, I think, useful skill, which we call cognitive reframing. Okay, and that's just a fancy way of saying when a thought that comes into our mind makes us feel like this on the left, how can we reframe so that we change the way that that thought presents? Okay, and I have here reframe because in a stop sign, because that's how I actually like to do it. Okay, when I myself have some kind of negative thought, for example, a very common one during the pandemic, man, I am stuck at home. What a terrible thing to be stuck at home and not be able to do anything, right? Okay, and that's maybe starts making me feel sad and lonely and whatever the case may be. But then if I recognize that I have a negative thought like that, I literally say to myself, stop, reframe. That's how I say it. That's actually literally how I say it sometimes. I say reframe. How can I reframe that thought? And so, for example, maybe I could reframe it by saying, you know what? Staying home right now is keeping me and keeping people safe. And so I am happy to do what I can to make sure that me and my family and my friends all stay okay during this difficult time. Okay, and so that's just a simple example of how one thought we can really that comes in and maybe quite distressing to us, we can change it, change the way we think about it to make it much more positive. Okay, now there's a lot of different kinds of thoughts that come into our mind. Okay, and I'm gonna introduce you to a little cast of characters here that are, I think, the source of a lot of these kinds of thoughts. Okay, meet my friends here, meet the cast. These are all the different kinds of characters that maybe will sound familiar to you, that are kind of talking in your mind and kind of coming up with these thoughts that might be distressing for you. Okay, so first guy, all or nothing Alan. We call him all or nothing Alan. All or nothing Alan is the person that thinks of everything as either black or white, right? So nothing in the middle. Everything is either completely perfect or completely miserable. Okay. Have you ever had this thought? Maybe you get a B on your exam, and your immediate thought is, "Man, I just failed that test. I just failed it so bad because I didn't do as well as I wanted to." Okay, that's all or nothing Alan right there. Or another example, my friend didn't say hi to me today. Man, my friend must really hate me. My friend must be really mad at me because this person didn't say hi. That's what all or nothing Alan sounds like. Okay, so how can we reframe those kinds of thoughts, right? Maybe our friend that didn't say hi to us, when we realize that we're thinking, oh, maybe this person doesn't care about me, we can reframe and say, oh, maybe this person was distracted and didn't notice me when I tried to say hi, right? Or when I get a B on my exam and I'm thinking, man, I failed, I just completely bombed this test. I can think, actually, a B, maybe it's not as good as I wanted to do, but it also could be much worse. And so maybe next time I could just try and study a little bit better for this exam. So that's all or nothing, Alan. All right. Vicky, tell us about blaming Blake. What does blaming Blake sound like?
Yeah, blaming Blake is always blaming somebody else for the problem, or even blaming himself. So it's kind of like overly taking responsibility for something when you're blaming yourself. And he's so busy blaming that he actually doesn't deal with the problem. So it can sound like, you know, what's wrong with that person? Why doesn't that person do something different? I hate when that person does that. And it's not really, it's really a kind of a little bit similar to All or Nothing Ellen in a way that, you know, like for example, one time blaming Blake blamed himself for not giving a birthday gift to a friend, even though he didn't know when the friend's birthday was. So he felt really guilty. He kind of shamed himself, you know, what kind of friend am I? And he felt really bad about himself. And then another time, you know, he blamed his teacher for a bad grade on a test, even though he didn't actually study for it. So this is kind of about blaming Blake really in a way, you know, a lot of things are not, they're just not black and white. And so sometimes in therapy, I'll use like a pie chart with someone like blaming Blake, and we'll kind of assign like, well, what percentage do you think was, you know, kind of your fault? And blaming Blake might either say all my fault, or he might say all somebody else's fault, the whole pie, the whole thing. But in actuality, it's often, you know, probably partially blaming Blake's fault and partially someone else's fault. There's a lot of factors that might go into this pie. Okay. So you can see how it's not that productive if you're just busy blaming either yourself or someone else. Do you want me to continue with, or you want to take over and over Oliver?
Sure. Let's do over and over Oliver. Okay. So over and over Oliver. What does that sound like? Well, he's the kind of guy that thinks just because something has happened once or twice, that it's just going to keep happening over and over. Okay. Does this sound familiar? Man, I lost the basketball game. You know what? Why am I even going to play the next one? Because we're just going to lose again, right? And so over and over, Oliver oftentimes forgets that just because something happened once, it doesn't mean that it necessarily has to happen again. But it's just so easy for him to focus on the past than to focus on the future. So when over and over Oliver has a kind of thought like, oh man, like why am I even playing? I'm just gonna lose again on the next game. Instead, we can reframe and say something like, well, I think there were some reasons why we lost this last one, but that's okay. Maybe in the next game, there are some things that we can work on to hopefully try and do better, right? So that's kind of how we can deal with over and over Oliver, who may be in our head. I'm going to talk about Negative Nate as well, because Negative Nate is one of my favorites. Negative Nate is the guy that only ever notices all the bad things and somehow is completely blind to all the good things, right? And so this one might sound very familiar to you. Negative Nate is the kind of guy that's going to say, man, my brother is so annoying. He's always just messing things up for me and making me mad, right? That's what Negative Nate sounds like. And we can maybe reframe and say, oh, maybe I'm just focusing on the times that my brother, maybe I felt annoyed by my brother, but I should also remember that my brother also sometimes helps me out or does these things for me or cares about me. And I shouldn't just forget about those as well. So Negative Nate is another one I think that comes up very frequently in our minds because it's so easy when something's going wrong to only focus on that and forget that there's a lot of things that are going on that are actually quite positive. Okay, Vicky, tell me about Shoulda Sharonda.
Yeah. Okay. Shoulda Sharonda is something I also commonly see. Um, and that's like really about shoulda Sharonda taking external kind of standards and always thinking about what she should or must do, even though actually nobody's even telling her she has to do them. So it's kind of about like if she's hanging out with her friends, she might think, I can't be doing this. I shouldn't be enjoying myself. I really should be home studying, and so I can be a straight A student. And no matter how much she does, though, she actually never feels like it's enough. And she always thinks she should be doing more and is never really at peace, actually. So she feels guilty. She can't enjoy being with her friends. And Sharonda always thinks about what other people should be doing too. And so she might end up being really critical of other people, and if they don't actually do what she thinks they should be doing, so she would end up getting angry, frustrated, feeling helpless, feeling powerless, a pretty negative kind of cycle there. So reframing would just involve telling yourself, or Sharonda telling herself, i'm I'm gonna take some time to enjoy my friends, being with them. And then when I get home, I'm going to study hard and try my best. I'm going to I'm going to really put my best effort into my studying. And so you can see how there's a little bit of more balance there for shoulda Sharonda, kind of being, rather than being dictated by the shouldas, she's kind of allowing herself to reframe that situation rather than being under this kind of heavy weight and burden of what she should be doing, which is not healthy. Okay,
All
moving
right.
on. Yeah.
For the sake of time, I'm gonna jump to the last one. Another one that I think comes up a lot, bad mouth Brandy. Okay, this is bad mouth Brandy. Bad mouth Brandy likes to, when something happens, likes to either call someone else or call herself a name. So I think this one is for all the drivers out there. Bad mouth Brandy comes out a lot because maybe someone didn't see us on the road while we're driving, and then they maybe either did something that made us feel unsafe. And we will self badmouth Brandy in our mind. Will often say things like, "Man, that guy's such a jerk. Why can't he just drive properly?" Right? And sometimes we need to reframe and think about something like, you know, when I'm having a bad day, sometimes it's really hard for me to focus on driving so well. Maybe this other person is having a bad day himself and is distracted while he's on the road. Something that Badmouth Brandy says a lot among our teenagers is, oh, I didn't get so many likes on Instagram. I didn't get so many views on TikTok. I must be a loser. I must be a loser. That's Badmouth Brandy because it's something that has nothing to do with who we are, but for some reason she will attach it to us and how we think about ourselves. And so sometimes we need to reframe, oh, um, it doesn't really quite mean anything for me how many likes that my post gets on Instagram. That really has nothing to do with how I should feel about myself or how I should feel about my self-worth. So all of these characters are characters that show up in our mind. And I have to say, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how mentally healthy you feel. You probably notice as we've been talking that all of these kinds of thoughts appear from time to time in our mind, right? And perhaps the less mentally healthy we are, the more those kinds of thoughts take over. But even when we're very healthy, these kinds of thoughts will always come up. And that's just because that's how man is kind of designed. And that's how kind of our mind likes to work. And so it's important to learn how, when those thoughts come in, how we can reframe, how we can stand up against those thoughts, and make sure that we keep our thoughts healthy, because the more that we let our thoughts become unhealthy, the more we start to stay in those kinds of thoughts. And that's, again, when we start falling into much more distress, or start feeling much more depressed or much more anxious. Okay, Vicki, why don't we?
Yeah, so this is a kind of particular form of reframing that we wanted to highlight. And I just have this verse here: be kind to one another, tenderhearted. And we know that we should be kind to one another, but somehow we are sometimes not that kind to ourselves. And actually being kind to ourselves. So this is about and all of those reframes were really about noticing your thoughts. Like you have to actually notice, how are you thinking in order to just do something about it, right? So this is kind of a practice of being kind to yourself that has been shown by research, especially among teenagers, to be associated with reduced symptoms of anxiety, reduced symptoms of depression, that is, feelings of worthlessness, particularly, and an increase in motivation, productivity, and overall well being. So, we really wanted to highlight this form of reframe called self compassion. And it's really not the same thing as self pity or self indulgence. It's really about these three elements here that I've got. Firstly, being kind versus self judgment. And that involves just kind of understanding that, we can't just always be exactly or what we want to be, but we're on our way. Okay. We're all growing and learning. And so it's kind of about just really even thinking about, how do you respond to a friend when a friend has a failure or makes a mistake or messes up? You kind of usually you just say, oh man, yeah, that's rough. You didn't mean for that to happen. And look what happened, and now you know what not to do, maybe. It's like it's pretty kind and compassionate. Whereas kind of our the way we might talk to ourselves is like, you're such an idiot, how could you be so stupid, you know why didn't you think about that, or predict, how come you didn't predict that that might happen, and then head it off. We're really pretty critical to ourselves. And so this is the first component of being kind to ourselves that is associated with these positive benefits. It's being kind to ourselves. If we deny like reality or fight against suffering, like we dismiss maybe that we're having a hard time with something, it can lead to more stress and more frustration and even paralysis. Sometimes some of us might struggle with perfectionism or procrastination. And this is maybe one of those elements where you're so critical. You just have to get it right. And, the first time, or else you feel like you're a failure. Okay. Well, this is, if you can accept the reality that I've got a tough presentation ahead of me, and, it's not going to be easy, but I'm gonna, break it down into chunks and just do it step by step, then you'll just have balance. So that's why I have that little photo there of balance. That is challenges, and the way to meet those challenges, it has to do with practicing this kind of reframe. And then the second element is just identifying yourselves as part of common humanity versus ending up isolating. So maybe saying to yourself, yeah, I'm so defective. No one can fix me. If anyone knew how I really am, they would just totally reject me. So you can see how those kinds of thoughts would end up isolating you from others, right? Or hiding from others. And then you've got this internal tension of what you maybe like shoulda, sharonda, what you think you should be a certain way, and instead, nobody knows how I really am. It's, so you end up withdrawing from others versus kind of saying to yourself, um, you know, yeah, not I'm not perfect, and nobody else is perfect either, and we're just something that we're all going through is suffering or just a hard time or struggles, and that's okay. That's part of being human. It's part of the shared human experience. Okay. And then we've got this third element there of mindfulness versus over identification. Sorry, that's a big mouthful, but it's really kind of what we've been talking about. It's about just taking a balanced approach to our negative feelings or emotions, not suppressing them, not exaggerating them, just being aware of them and acknowledging them and not over identifying with them. So, in other words, you don't like attach your identity to these negative feelings or negative emotions. It's just non-judgmental, just kind of noticing, yeah, that this is what's going on. And rather than, ignoring or suppressing and then ending up unbalanced, getting swept up in those that tension there of holding those negative feelings inside. So this is great. I want to try to do we have time for this exercise? If we can do it, just maybe we won't do all of the questions, but I want you to just you don't even have to write this down, but just think about, okay, we're going to go through a couple of this exercise. How would you treat a friend? And so first, I just want you to think about times when a close friend feels really bad about him or herself or is really struggling in some way, whether that's school or at home or with some friendships. How would you respond to your friend in this situation, especially when you're at your best and feeling peaceful inside? So, what would you typically do? What would you say? Note the tone in which you typically talk to your friends. Um, And now just think about times when you feel bad about yourself or you are struggling. And how do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? So think about that and notice what do you think you would say to yourself? What would be the tone that you would use with yourself? And then think about, did you notice a difference between what you might say to a friend and what you say to yourself? And if so, yeah, think about why, like what factors or fears might come into play that lead you to treat yourself and others so differently. Um, and then how do you think it might change you if you responded to yourself in the same way that you respond to a friend who's going through some kind of suffering or difficulty? Um, so I just like this little question at the end. Why not try treating yourself like a good friend and see what happens? And like I shared earlier, it's a little surprising, but when you do this, and I've been really trying to do this for myself because I am a procrastinator, and I feel like there's just there's the possibility for change actually, and for increased motivation when you allow yourself um, to basically treat yourself this way. And part of this actually is even um, all of this is based, you could say, in biblical or spiritual principles. The word is full of God's perspective and kind of even the story of kind of common humanity and what were the experiences of the believers. Sometimes we might say to ourselves, I'm just not a good Christian, so I give up. But if you read the Bible, you'll see lots of mistakes, lots of needing correction or discipline, but also God's side is that we are loved, we are accepted in Christ, we are growing into full maturity. There's so many biblical truths. And so we just kind of need to, these are anyway a parallel to the spiritual things that we see in the word also.
So before we continue on, there was a request in the chat to just quickly describe who Drama Queen Jean and Psych Out Sam are. So I'll just quickly talk about those two characters real quick. Drama Queen Jean is the person that is always blowing everything out of proportion, right? So even if something really small happens, or even if it's something that's not that small, but it happens, then it becomes the end of the world, okay? And I know that this happens to all of us. Young people, I know this drama queen gene happens a lot because sometimes we think that something happens and it's the end of the world. Um, and sometimes, dear saints, I would even apply this in a spiritual way. Sometimes we commit a sin or something that we know does not make the Lord happy. And what does drama queen Jean say? She says, "Oh, you are not qualified anymore to be a Christian. You are just the worst Christian. You are no longer qualified. You shouldn't even be saved. What's going on?" Drama queen Jean really likes to blow one thing out of proportion. And sometimes that's the reason why we find ourselves in really negative thoughts because we forget that, for example, that the blood of God's blood cleanses us from all sin, and that He forgives us and He forgets, right? So sometimes we just really need to reframe that. The other one is Psych Out Sam. Psych Out Sam always is psyching himself out because he just expects the worst all the time. He just is always thinking that people don't like him or they're out to get him. And something that Psych Out Sam doesn't realize, and maybe you can identify with this, is that we don't have the ability to read someone else's mind. But a lot of times, Psych Out Sam will come up and say, "Oh, that person just doesn't care about you. Oh, that person doesn't like you anymore." And we always think that we know what's going on in the brain of another person. So we need to reframe. "Oh, I don't know why maybe he wasn't talking to me this week. I don't know, maybe he's going through something." And so sometimes we just really need to take care of Psych Out Sam and what he might say in our mind. Okay. So take care of time. I'm going to move on here to the emotion. And this is a little interactive exercise. So if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, you can do this, or you can do this in your mind. But I want to talk about the emotional bucket. Okay. Everyone has an emotional bucket, and the bucket is something that carries all the different things going on in our life that causes us stress or negative feelings or anxiety. And we oftentimes we oftentimes put things into our bucket and we don't realize that they're there. Okay, so I want to take a moment, and if you have a piece of paper, you can just draw a bucket. If you don't have a piece of paper, you can just think about your bucket. But if you just think about what's going on with you right now, okay, think about what are the different things that are in your emotional bucket. What are the things that are causing you stress? What are the things that happened recently that have been stressing you out, have been making you feel anxious? What are the different thoughts in your mind? Okay, and sometimes what I like to do with my clients is we draw in the bucket. And if it's something that's like just a small little thing, just something that's been bugging us, it's just like a small little rock. But sometimes it's like a huge thing that happened that we can't get over, and maybe it takes up a lot of space. So you want to draw those things bigger. Okay, so I'm just going to give everyone a minute to just draw some things in your bucket or to think about what those things might be. Let's give everyone 15 more seconds. Just think about what's in your bucket. Okay. You know, if I was a young person right now at this particular time, these would be the things that would be in my bucket. Okay, and some of these things actually are in my bucket. Some of these things are things that I hear from other people I work with. But here's some examples. Okay, there's something that happened in my past that I cannot move on from. Something really big happened. I'm not telling anyone. I can't open it up, but I just cannot move on from it. It's affecting me too much. Man, when is the pandemic going to end? It feels like we've been in isolation forever. It feels like is it even going to end? Is life going to go back to normal? That's always bugging me. So it's always in my bucket. There's something, there's a secret I'm holding and I know I need to tell my parents, but I just don't know how to tell them. I need to tell someone, but I just don't know how to open it up to my parents. I just keep seeing people on Instagram having so much fun, and I'm not having the kind of fun that they are. I keep seeing all my friends doing such cool things, and it just makes me so upset that I cannot do those things too. I'm just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling on Instagram. I'm just spending hours on there, and then that's all I see. And so it just makes me so distressed. Man, my friend did something and I got offended. It's something pretty silly, but yeah, I can't get over it. I'm mad at my friend, so we're not talking right now. And I am just feeling so tired. I'm just so exhausted. I just cannot deal with everything going on. I'm so behind on my homework. There's so many stressful homework assignments that are due. And to top it off, I just got into a fight with my siblings and we're not talking anymore right now either. Okay. If you look at your own bucket or think about what's in your own bucket, man, like look how full this bucket is. Okay. And if your bucket looks anything like this, which a lot of people's buckets do without realizing, you'll probably understand why it's so easy when something small happens to feel like we are so overwhelmed, okay? Because if I put any one thing in this bucket more, if I just put even a small circle, the bucket's gonna overflow. And whenever our bucket overflows, that's when we can't handle, that's when we start to have breakdowns. That's when we start crying. That's when we start panicking. And dear brothers and sisters, whether you're a young person or whether you're an adult, sometimes we have to realize that if someone feels really irritable, really grouchy, if someone keeps panicking and you're like, I don't know what they're panicking about. Someone feels really depressed and you're just, I just don't understand what they have to be so sad about. I hope there's a realization that everyone has a bucket within them that might be this full, and even the smallest thing will cause it to overflow. Okay. And so how do we deal with this? Dear saints, we need to learn how to constantly be taking things out of our bucket. All right. And so what are some ways that we can do that? Let me give some examples here. Okay, so if we are so behind on our homework, right? Well, what's a practical? Sometimes we need to do something practical, right? Like sometimes for me, I have so much work on my plate all the time. It really helps me to write things down that I need to do and see it all on paper and then figure out a plan. And a lot of times, once we do that, it's not so stressful anymore because we realize, oh, it's not that bad. I just need to make sure that I do a few things to take care of those responsibilities. Okay, I'm trying to make my, oh, here we go. Uh-oh. 1 second, sorry, dear saints. Okay. So That's maybe some way we can take that out of our bucket. Okay. Oh, I'm exhausted. Well, sometimes we forget about our exercise, about our sleep, about our diet, and we need to take care of those things. So if we're feeling really exhausted, maybe we go get some rest, or we do something that we enjoy, like a hobby or something that's might make us feel better. And so then we move that out of our bucket. Okay. Sometimes fighting with our siblings, getting offended by my friend. Sometimes it's something that we need to apologize for, right? And so maybe a way to take it out of our bucket is to go and say sorry. Or maybe a way to take it out of our bucket is to realize that it's really not a big deal and we just let it go. Okay. What I see on Instagram, how can we take that out of our bucket? Maybe it's time to take an Instagram break for a while. And I know plenty of people that have uninstalled just temporarily, but they see their mental health get so much better because they're not constantly seeing all the different things going on that make them unhappy. Okay. Something I don't know how to tell my parents. Well, dear saints, I hope that everyone has somebody. Maybe it's not your parents, but it's somebody that's older, that has some experience that you feel that you can open up to without any kind of judgment. Okay. And if you don't have someone like that, then I'd like you to identify someone, because everyone needs a person that they can open up to, that they know will listen without judgment. Okay. And so maybe we go tell that person. Something that we can't get over from our past. Well, brothers and sisters, sometimes if this thing is that huge, that's really when maybe professional help might be really necessary. And we just want to make a strong statement today that it's okay if we need help to even see if maybe working with a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist might help us to move on past some of the big things that have happened in our life. Okay. And I have this verse here, 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your anxiety on him because it matters to him concerning you. Dear saints, to cast means like literally to throw. Okay. Throw our anxiety on the Lord. This is always a way that we can take something out of our bucket. Because if we realize that there are some things we can't control, like for example, when the pandemic will end, then we throw it to the Lord. We open up to the Lord about how we feel. We throw it to the Lord, and we realize that we don't need to focus on the things that we can't control. Let's spend our time worrying about the things that we can. Okay. And so what happens is our bucket gets empty, and then we have space, because every day things are going to come in that are going to make you feel in a negative way. And you're going to need to have room in your bucket to hold on to it. And if you don't have any room, that's when we start getting into trouble. So, brothers and sisters, I would challenge you once a day, think about what is something that I can take out of my bucket today. What is a way that I can take something out of my bucket so I can make more room? And maybe you start with something that's the easiest thing in there, letting something go, giving something to the Lord, apologizing to someone, or maybe taking a break or doing something practical. But figure out a way once a day to make some room in your bucket by taking something out. Okay. All right. I realize we're running out of time, so we'll move on to this last one. Sorry, Vicky.
That's okay. Yeah. You want to go to the next slide, Alex? Yeah. So we're going to talk about the will. This is the last part of our soul, tripartite being there. What matters to you in your life? And this is about thinking about your values. And we have this verse here, but flee youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. And so this verse indicates that we have a choice to make. What are we going to flee? What do we want to pursue? And we can go on to the next slide. We just wanted to do a little exercise related to, you might have seen this or kind of heard this illustration used in the past, but it's really about identifying for yourself, what are your top values? The actual exercise is about identifying what are 6 kind of larger rock values. And in this photo here that I put in, you can see how this jar got filled with the really fine sand and some smaller rocks, and then the larger rocks couldn't fit in because they kind of went in last. So it's about thinking about, do your priorities, like what are you choosing daily? Do they match your values, what you value? And are you are you allotting the appropriate time? If you say your value is family, are you spending time with your family, or are you always playing video games or something? Oh, sorry, not to shame video games, but anyway, basically I filled mine out. And so I want you to just either kind of use your notes function, or even just think about it. What are 6 large rock values that you want to have in your life? Because all of us are like, just like this jar, we're kind of finite. We can't shove everything in. It's not all going to fit. So you want to put the big things in first, right? And then some smaller pebbles that still matter to you and help you support the larger rocks. And then what's the filler sand? Something in there that matters too. So I have some example values here, just to kind of get you going. And I'll kind of share with you guys my values. And a lot of these things, they're just very unique to you and how you were raised. So my 6 large rock values are family, faith, being thrifty, health, giving back, and church and community service. Church and community service, I guess that's a form of giving back, but anyway, it's also a form of receiving in community. It's very mutual. So, and then some of the smaller pebbles that still matter to you and help you support the large rocks. I've got friendship, hope, order versus chaos, change, and making a difference. And so you can see how these things that you value would shape your choices. So, for example, I made the choice to go back to get my master's, clinical master's in marriage and family therapy very late. I was like 40 or something, 40 years old. So I never imagined I would do that, but I really identified having these values, and so I made a choice to go back to school so I could become a therapist and help others make changes also. And then the filler sand. So what matters also for me, I put fun, adventure, uniqueness, and a few other things. So those are kind of the filler things that are, yeah, kind of support my jar. Okay. So this is a nice exercise because you are, again, thinking about what matters to you, and, what are your priorities, and does it line up with what you're actually doing in your life? And if not, you can do something different. You can choose to do something different based on this exercise. That's all I have. So let's see. We're
Yeah.
pretty much up on time here. Alex? Yeah.
With the last few minutes, just wanted to mention a couple things. And I want to stop sharing my screen. But just a couple things I think would be helpful to end with, dear Saints. First of all, I hope that everyone, if you feel like because of today, you realize that there are things that maybe you need to open up to someone. If there's something that you've been struggling with, if you're having a really hard time, I really encourage all of you young people to really, again, find that person that you can open it up to, and encourage you to open it up. I think a lot of times when we just keep it to ourselves, that's when all those characters come back, right? That's when All or Nothing Alan and Blaming Blake and everyone starts appearing in our mind. But when we open up to someone else, it's really helpful to realize that maybe there are ways that we can find help, or maybe that there are things we can do to help the situation. So if you're struggling with something, I just encourage you to find someone that you can open it up to, that will listen without any judgment. Okay. The other thing with our last minute that I want to mention is that these are just a few examples of the many kinds of different ways that therapy can be helpful, or different kinds of activities that we do in therapy. So if you found this time helpful today, I hope that's an encouragement to you. Like Vicky said, that the therapy process wouldn't be so unclear, but actually it's just very helpful ways that we can learn how to take care of all the parts of our soul. And these are the different kinds of activities that many people have found help from, even when working with a professional. So we would just encourage you, if you feel like this would be helpful for you in a more ongoing way, there's nothing wrong with reaching out and seeing if maybe we could start working with someone, even in a professional way.
Mhm.
Vicky, do you have any last things to say?
Yeah, I'm just glad that you mentioned that. I really, I want to say, Brotherly says in Mystery of Human Life, for problems of the soul, one should see a psychologist or an LMFT or an LPCC. Anyway, I know it's a little bit confusing also sometimes when you're searching for someone. Should you prioritize finding a Christian therapist? And both Alex and I feel that's not really necessary. That shouldn't be the primary criteria. The primary criteria should be, does this person have experience treating whatever you are going through? And is that person licensed and trained in, even sometimes people have specialty training in whatever it is that you are struggling with. And if you're not sure, the place to start with would be your primary care physician. If you're struggling and it's impacting your daily life or relationships, it better to go earlier rather than later. And for sure, for even major life events like the death of a loved one or high conflict with your parent, sometimes these are not, there's no need to wait, okay, is what I'm saying, until you really need it. Then that's really hard to come back from. So it's better to just go and see. I will testify. The question is, does it really work? I think that's a primary question, right? You're paying these fees, and does it really work? Well, research does show, and my experience also shows that just yeah, for being able to talk to someone in a really free way and just get that kind of neutral third party. You don't have a It's not a two-way relationship, so you don't have to impress them. You don't have to make them like you. You don't have to pretend, or yeah, it's just a very safe place to just open up and talk about whatever you're worried about, or whatever is concerning you. That's all. There's a few I'm gonna just put this in the chat, or maybe I should just put it well, I'll just put it in here for everyone to see. This is a low cost if you don't have good insurance coverage. Sometimes that's an issue for finances. You can look at this therapist directory that offers lower fee services, lower than market fee. So that's one directory you can use. Yes, and this one also.
And the other website I just put in the chat as well is just it's the largest database that we have of mental health professionals. So you're able to search by location, by age, by insurance, and by need. So that's a helpful website as well. Okay, so talk to your parents, talk to your serving ones, if this is something that you feel like might be helpful for you. Okay, we are out of time.
Okay, I'm just going to post this. I believe the recording will be posted on scyp.com. Is that right, Alex?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Grace be with you all.